good loud, all right? We have come into His house, gathered in His name to worship Him. We have come into His house, gathered in His name to worship Him. We have come into His house, gathered in His name to worship Christ the Lord. Worship Him, Christ the Lord. Let's forget ourselves and magnify His name and worship Him. Let's forget ourselves and magnify His name and worship Him. Let's forget ourselves and magnify His name and worship Christ the Lord. Worship Him, Christ the Lord. Can you say amen to that? I don't know about you, but I sometimes I don't like rules and boundaries. Sometimes they're ridiculous. In the I'm looking for my glasses. I have no idea. Maybe I won't be able to give this message this morning because I have laid my glasses down somewhere or lost them or bent over or something. And Sarah's not here to pick them up for me if I did. But nonetheless, I will preach this message. Now, you just, as I preach it, you better pray that I either have a good memory or that I find my glasses or something there somewhere. Maybe these will work. I don't know. Because I've dropped them somewhere. But nonetheless, if I can't see what I'm saying, I'm allowed to preach that 1 o'clock message there. All right. No, that's fine. I'll get these. Most of the message I don't need them for, but occasionally I do. Some rules are ridiculous, don't you think? I used to tell our high school students up in Maryland, I said, we lay awake at night thinking of rules that we can put in place. Our whole purpose is to make you high school kids miserable. No, it wasn't our purpose. We had reasons for rules that we had. The Victorian era that you read about historically was during the reign of Queen Victoria in England, and that was about 1820 to 1900. And she was known for being very religious and very, very strict. And during that Victorian era, there was a book published called How to Do, kind of a how to do things right manual. And it was published by a lady, and it was about etiquette. Well, in that volume, to put books on the shelf, you had to put male authors in one place and female authors in another. They couldn't be together. Now, unless, of course, the male author in a particular book was married to the female author, then they could put the books together. Now you say, well, that's just ridiculous. But yeah, it's a ridiculous rule. We know that. But some rules are somewhat ridiculous. Certainly, the old rule, and it was literally a law. You think that our politicians pass a lot of stupid things now? They've always done that. They're politicians. It's part of their DNA. But nonetheless, they had a law that said men couldn't spit their tobacco on the sidewalk. Well, now that was because the ladies wore, it was a practical rule, the ladies wore the skirts that were, I guess, dragging the ground, or at least pretty close to it. So it could ruin their dresses. Now, that rule has no reason to exist today. Because frankly, they'd have to, the tobacco would have to be waist high before they can get to the ladies' dresses nowadays, in most cases. But nonetheless, it was a law, literally a law. Rules are there to help us, whether they restrict us or whether they require action, whether we like them or we don't like them. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, those rules and laws are there to help people. Not always. Sometimes they're there to justify the existence of politicians, but nonetheless, so boundaries. Boundaries can be a great comfort, or they can be a terrible frustration. Boundaries can be comfort, or they can frustrate me. It depends on which side of the fence that you're on. And you look up there, if I'm near that fellow up there at the top, I don't care which side he's on, I want to be on the other side. I want a boundary, okay? That's to protect me. And then there are boundaries that protect us from ourselves. We'll be going around some of these curves and these mountain roads. My wife will look out and say, they need to have a guardrail there. This is dangerous. It's too close to the edge. They need a guardrail. Well, I like guardrails. I never hit one. Put a lot of them up. In the summer we got married, I spent my summer putting up guardrail on a highway. And but haven't hit one yet, because that guardrail is there to protect us, so that when I fall asleep at the wheel or something, it keeps me from going off the road, all right? And then, of course, there are other boundaries. There's a comedian that comes on and said, people have no idea the power that you have. He said, you're just one click away from ordering orange cones in the mail and then making traffic go anywhere you want it to go. You know, just setting them up. Well, that's a boundary. It's a boundary to help guide us and move us in the right direction, you see. Sometimes the same boundary can be comforting as well as frustrating, depending on your perspective and so on. We face boundaries. We have a boundary around our possessions and our property. Now, we may not have a fence, but there are boundaries there. Just because you don't have a fence up doesn't mean that somebody can come on your property and do whatever they want. There are boundaries, legal boundaries. There are professional boundaries that we have. We treat people according to our relationship with them on a professional basis and so on. We have boundaries that protect our physical well-being. Guardrails, for example. And they protect us. We have boundaries affecting our time and schedule. We start in our church, relatively speaking, at 11 o'clock for the service, okay? Now, early in my ministry, boy, if it's 11:01, let's get this thing going. You know, I was impatient. The older I get, the less I realize a few minutes is going to impact anything. I don't quite worry about it anymore. We have boundaries of energy. Last Friday, I came up to a day that by about 12 or 1, I was so worn out, tired. The rest of the day was just a take-it-off day. I couldn't study, I couldn't read, I was falling asleep in my chair. We have physical boundaries that restrict what we're able to do sometimes. And boundaries regarding our attitude towards others. We have social boundaries. You're not supposed to treat people like dirt because there's a social boundary there, you see. God has set up boundaries for us. God set up boundaries in nature. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 4, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God said, I'm going to make part of the day light, part of the day darkness. Even the oceans, look what he said about the oceans and the boundaries they have in the seas. Psalm 104, thou hast set a boundary that they may not pass over. I'm sorry for that going over the mic there. But in Proverbs 8:29, when he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should not pass his commandment. So God set boundaries. He put a shoreline there, and he says to the seas, that's as far as you're going. There's your boundary. He does the same. If God has set boundaries on the material creation, he certainly expects us to set boundaries, observe the boundaries to his most precious possession. In Exodus chapter 20, we have the Ten Commandments. Those are boundaries that God set up. You want to please God, you want to have a right relationship with God, you observe those boundaries. My wife and I have been married 57 and a half years. Now there are certain boundaries God set up. You want a good relationship with your wife, you're going to treat her in a certain manner. You're going to respect others, and you're going to keep yourself under her. That's part of the marriage vow. All of that because God set boundaries for us, you see. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Boundaries are set. God sets boundaries. He has his reasons. For example, God set boundaries to protect us from self-destructive activities. In the Old Testament, you've got a man by the name of Amnon. Amnon was one of David's sons. And Amnon had a half-sister. David had multiple wives. He had many children. Occasionally, he'd have more than one child with one wife. Absalom was the brother of his sister, and this is where she comes into the picture, because Amnon was a son of David, but of another wife. Amnon lusted after her, and some refer to it as love, but it's not the right word. Amnon was lusting after her. It was a physical love. And then Amnon had this friend. And friends like this, you don't need enemies. He says, Amnon, I can help you get her. We'll set this whole situation up so she'll be in your apartment and she'll be taking care of you. And you'll set it up so you can have her physically. Now, sometimes I preach a message to teenagers and I remind them that if you've got friends like Amnon's friend, you don't need any enemies. Because what he suggested brought death and destruction to them. All right? So here's Amnon. And he crossed the boundaries. He took her. He raped her. Now, let's say, well, he satisfied his desire. Well, Amnon failed to submit to the moral boundaries that God had set up. It led to eventually, and I don't have time to go into the whole story, but it led to his brother's hatred. Absalom absolutely hated Amnon from then on. And he planned for a couple of years how to get his revenge on Amnon. And when the time came, he had his servants kill Amnon and others as well. And his sister was marred for life. And because of that, the revenge caused Absalom to be out of fellowship with his father for 2 years. And begin to rebel against his father. All of these circumstances because Amnon did not observe boundaries that God had set. God sets our boundaries so that we don't destroy ourselves. Amen. So that we don't destroy our relationships and ourselves. A resort in Breckenridge, Colorado posted signs warning of skiers to keep off the certain slopes. Well, a whole group of skiers ignored the signs. They skied in a dangerous area. Avalanche occurred, and several skiers died in that avalanche. The tragedy would never have happened if all they'd done is just observe the boundaries. There are boundaries set for a reason. A soldier of Israel decides not to observe the boundaries that God had set. Achan ignored God's warning not to take of the spoils of Jericho. Leave that alone. God said, I'm not taking from the wicked. heathen. Don't touch it. And Achan took it to his tent, hid it in his tent. I can only assume, we're not told exactly what his family's involvement was, but the fact that the condemnation came on them as well. How would he have hid it in his tent without the family knowing about it? So when the time came that it was revealed, because they had lost the battle of Ai, you remember what it was? They went to battle at Ai, they said, this is a little place. We don't need all these soldiers. We'll just set a certain number up there. 37 men died in that battle. Why? Because of Achan. Because he did not observe the boundaries God set. Amen. Not only them, but then his wife, himself, perhaps his children, who knew about this taking of this spoils. So there could have been not just 37, but 40. More than 40 people died because one man said, nuts to those boundaries. I'm not going to observe that boundary. And of course, they paid the price. All these died because a man ignored the boundaries to set. On the other hand, sometimes boundaries are good for us. Rahab was in Jericho. Rahab lived on a house set. There were 2 walls around the city, and they were about 15 feet apart, 20 feet apart. And many houses were built on the top of those walls. They would stretch from one to the other. The spies went to Rahab's house for 2 reasons. One, Rahab was a harlot. So it was nothing unusual for people to see men going and coming at Rahab's house. And from her house, they could look out a window, and they were high enough up, those walls were about 15 feet up, and the house was set on that. And they could look out over the city and observe. They were spies. They were getting a view of the city. And Rahab had heard all about the Jews and Israelites coming. And in hearing about them, she knew God was on the side of Israel. She'd heard all these miracles. And so she said, I'll hide your spies. I'll help your spies. But I want to survive. And I want my family to survive. Now, the spies said, that's fine. You do 2 things. You get all of your family in your house that day. On that day, you get them all inside your house. If they're outside your house, they're fair game. So she got them all inside. You also hang a scarlet thread or rope out the window, so we know to identify that house. Just 2 simple tasks. But Rahab observed them to the letter. Everything. She got all the family inside her home. She put that scarlet thread out there, as it were. And when the city was attacked, Rahab and all her family survived. You know why? Because she observed the boundaries that God set. Amen. I think they stayed within the boundaries, and God blessed. God set boundaries to protect us from the enemy of our soul. We can go back to Eve and think of that. Here's Eve. She failed to observe the boundaries that God set. Can you get any simpler? They're in the Garden of Eden. They picked breakfast, lunch, dinner off trees. The most delicious fruit I think the world has ever seen probably was growing in the Garden of Eden. They had no pressure on them at all. And then one day, she decides that God must be holding something back. Satan sidles up to her in the presence of a serpent, and of course, she begins to believe the serpent. And the serpent says, did God really say that? That's my translation of it. Is that really what God said? Perhaps God told you not to eat of that fruit because he knows that once you eat of that fruit, you're going to be like him, knowing what's good and what's evil. Well, that's true. He just didn't bother to tell her that once you know what's good and what's evil, you won't be able to choose the good because you'll have a fallen nature then. And so she takes this message and she decides, I think God is trying to hold something back. And she participates in that fruit. And it causes, of course, then she gives it to Adam. And Adam casts the whole human race into sin. One command, one slight command, and it casts the whole human race into sin. I have a lot of things I'd like to say about that. I don't have time to do that. But boundaries are set, folks. Boundaries were set so that he could preserve Adam and Eve from the enemy of their souls. They stepped out of those boundaries, and the whole human race has suffered since then. Psalm 84:11, when it was presented to Eve, it was presented with the idea that God is trying to hold something back from you. People don't get saved. So, well, I don't want to be restricted the way God's Word restricts us. You know, one of the things I noticed right after I got saved is that I thought I was going to have to give up a whole lot of stuff. And I knew that a lot of things I was doing in my life had to stop. I knew that. But I had no knowledge of all the things he was going to bring into my life that were far better. Far better. No, God set boundaries so he can protect us from the enemy of our souls. In Judges, Samson's the same way. Samson was a powerful man. Isn't it interesting how generals and kings and strong men like Samson always seem to be weak men? We're even told in Proverbs that a man who can control his own appetites is greater than the greatest general, more capable than the greatest general. In Proverbs 84, verse 11, no good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. So, if what you're wanting is a good thing, then God's not going to withhold it. But if God withholds it, then you can guarantee that it is either not a good thing or it's not God's time. Which either way, you need to back away from that, you see. Samson, of course, broke the boundaries. He went down into the Philistines. He told his parents, he says, I'm going down there to get a wife. His parents begged him, don't go down there. Don't go to this unsaved den of iniquity to get yourself a wife. Samson says, I know better. I can do this. I'm strong. I can handle this. He goes down without taking the time to tell the whole story. You know where it led. It eventually led to breaking up his home, conflict with the Philistines, burning their fields down, and made an enemy out of them. And then he begins to cohabit with a harlot again. Now, Samson had the Nazirite vow. There were a couple of things with this. One is he was never to cut his hair. One was also he was never to partake of strong drink. And he was never to touch a dead body. To make a long story short, Samson did all three. God set those boundaries up because he wanted Samson separated unto him as a judge of Israel, to be an example of God's working in Israel. And yet Samson disobeyed every single one of them. All of them. And it cost him. It cost him his life. It cost him his influence. It cost him his sight. It cost him great humiliation. And finally, got some revenge at the end of it. But Samson did not observe the boundaries God set. God set boundaries to protect our influence and our testimony. God has set boundaries on your life to protect the impact that you can have on others, you see. Lot learned the price to be paid when you ignore the boundaries. He learned from Abraham what God required. He saw Abraham's example of godliness. He watched Abraham's consistent worship. Yet when faced with the opportunity to make money and have the lush fields and so on, he went for the money. He went for the wealth. Abraham had set boundaries. He had shown him the boundary. Lot didn't take it. And even when the angels came and said, all right, God's going to destroy the city, if you notice, and we don't have time to go to it, but if you notice, it got time to actually go. Here, Lot had been sent out. Are there any others in your family? Go get them. Go get them. Try to get them to come in. He had 2 daughters still living at home. The others were all married, had families, perhaps children. And he went to try to convince them. And they wouldn't listen. They thought he'd gone nuts. They thought he'd gone crazy. And they wouldn't listen to him. He did not observe the boundaries that God sent. And it cost him all the testimony that he had. It cost him any influence that he had with his children and grandchildren. And they all died. Even though he took the 2 daughters out, we don't have time for that story, but Lot or Sodom had not come out of them when it came time to leave. This is a part of the story that just amazes me sometimes, that the 2 daughters are there, the wife is there, Lot is there, and the angels are saying, it's time to go, right now, let's go. And you know what happened? It said Lot lingered. He lingered. That word. And the angels had to literally reach out and take them by the hand. And the word that's used there, where they took him by the hand, is that they took him by the hand and they pulled him out of Sodom. Him, his wife, and 2 daughters. As you know, his wife didn't make it very far out of the city. And even though the daughters got out, Sodom didn't get out of them. They were still wicked. Lot had choices to make. Lot chose to ignore the boundaries that God had set. And he suffered for it. God has set boundaries for us, for all of us. God has set up perimeters for us. Everywhere we look, there are boundaries set up that we are supposed to observe. Near my house in North Carolina, we lived in Asheville. Not far from there, maybe 40 miles, is a place called Chimney Rock. You've probably heard about it. It's a big, huge tourist area. And the town, Chimney Rock, was pretty well wiped out in the flood a year or 2 ago. But if you go up on that mountain, and you get up on that lookout there, and it's very, very easy to see. You can look out and you can see many miles, all right? But there's also a walkway, so that you get that. Now, I did it a couple of times years ago. I wouldn't even attempt it today because it's a difficult path. But along that path are places where waterfalls come, and they have fences set up, embedded into the rock, and signs saying, don't get out of the path. Don't get outside of the path. But you know what? Every year, somebody decides, I'm going to get out on that waterfall. And somewhere in the newspaper, you're going to see where somebody got out of the boundary. And they paid with their life when they slipped in the waterfall. And down they went to their death. As a pastor, I have put out words so many times to people, warned them about getting out of the boundaries that God has set. Had a young lady in my church in Bryson City, came about halfway up in the pews on this side. She'd been married twice already, divorced. And she told me, she said, I'm getting married. Oh, I said, and who is, she wasn't a member of our church, but she came frequently. And I said, who are you getting married to? Well, so I gave the name, and she said, I said, is he from here? Well, he is. He'll be getting out of prison in a few weeks. And I shook my head, and I don't enjoy doing this, but I burst her bubble. I said, you've gone down the path twice, and it's ruined your life. God sets boundaries. You're about to go down that path again. And I guarantee you, you're going to come to a place called regret because you get off of God's path. Old farmer was praying one day, and he was thanking the Lord for good crops and so on. And he said, Lord, you've been good to me. And then he said, there've been a couple times, Lord, where things didn't go so well. And it was almost like an afterthought. He kind of looked up and said, oh, but Lord, he says, that time in my life, he said, that wasn't your fault. That was my fault. Because I got off the path. I got outside the boundaries. And I paid the price for being outside the boundaries. You want to see God bless your home? Stay in the boundaries. You want to see God work in and through you? Stay in the boundaries, folks. You want to see God bless your family, your children, your wife, your husband, all that? Stay in the boundaries. God sets boundaries to preserve our relationships. God sets boundaries to preserve our safety, physical and spiritual. And God sets boundaries to maintain your impact and your influence.